In 2004, the average person could hold their focus on a single digital task for 2.5 minutes. By 2024, that number had collapsed to 47 seconds. That is not a cultural trend. That is a measured neurological decline across an entire species. And the internal documents now entering federal courtrooms suggest it was not an accident. What they did was intentional. The world's largest digital platforms have all adopted a specific behavioral system known as the variable ratio reinforcement schedule. The same formula that keeps a gambler pulling a slot machine lever for 14 hours straight, choosing to embed it in the framework of products used by billions of people, while also removing the natural stopping cues that allow your brain to disengage. And when their own internal research confirmed the damage, particularly to adolescents, they allegedly buried it. This is the system that stole your focus. And this is what it's costing you. In January 2026, the first bellwether trials began in a California courtroom, putting executives from Meta and Google on the stand to answer a single question. Did you design your platforms to be addictive? What separates this trial from the usual finger-pointing is the evidence. Unsealed internal memos in which engineers allegedly compared themselves to drug pushers, ongoing brain imaging studies, internal audits that were reportedly suppressed, and a paper trail that stretches back not years, but decades. This isn't speculation, this is documented, and the system at the center of it all has a name. To grasp how your brain was manipulated, we must examine a single pivotal experiment. In the 1950s, a psychologist named B.F. Skinner placed pigeons inside small boxes rigged with a lever. When the pigeon pressed the lever, it received a food pellet. Simple enough. But Skinner noticed something strange. When the reward came every single time, the pigeon would press the lever, eat, and stop. Predictable reward produced moderate behavior. So Skinner changed the rules. He made the reward random. Sometimes the pigeon got food, sometimes it didn't, and sometimes it got a bigger reward than expected. The result was extraordinary. The pigeons pressed the lever compulsively. They couldn't stop. Even when no food came for long stretches, they kept pressing. Skinner called this a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, and he identified it as the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning ever observed. Now here's why that matters. In 1998, a researcher named B.J. Fogg founded the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab. Its tagline was chillingly direct: machines designed to change humans. Fogg developed what became known as the Fogg behavior model, a formula that says behavior occurs when three things converge: motivation, ability, and a prompt. Make the motivation high, the action easy, and the trigger well-timed, and you can engineer almost any behavior you want. Fogg's lab became a training ground. Many of the people who studied under him went on to build the engagement systems at the companies you now use daily. The formula from the 1950s pigeon box had found its way to Silicon Valley, and from there, it found its way into your phone. But a formula alone isn't enough. You also need to remove the thing that would normally make a person stop. Imagine reading a book, assuming people still read books these days. You reach the end of a chapter, and something in your brain says, "Good stopping point." That's your executive function, the prefrontal cortex, stepping in and applying a break. A chapter break is what researchers call a stopping cue. It's a natural boundary that gives your conscious mind a chance to decide whether to keep going or do something else. Now think about what happened in 2006. That year, a design concept called infinite scroll was introduced to the internet. Before infinite scroll, web pages had endings. You'd reach the bottom, and the page was done. Your brain would register that boundary, and you'd make a decision. Click to the next page or close the tab. Infinite scroll eliminated that boundary entirely. The content simply never ends. There's no bottom of the page, chapter break, or opportunity for your prefrontal cortex to intervene. And this wasn't an accident. Research published in the Proceedings of the ACM on human-computer interaction looked closely at this process and discovered that infinite scrolling makes users stay online longer because it takes away the signals that would help them stop using it. However, removing stopping cues was only half of the engineering effort. The other half involved filling the gap. Every time you pull down to refresh a social media feed, you're performing the exact same gesture as pulling a slot machine lever. And the outcome is identical in structure. You don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's something exciting. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's a post that makes you angry or sad or jealous. The quality is deliberately inconsistent, and that's the point. This is where a neuroscience concept called reward prediction error comes in. Your brain is hardwired to pay heightened attention to outcomes that differ from what it expected. When the feed delivers something surprising, good or bad, your brain's nucleus accumbens fires a burst of dopamine. Not because the content made you happy, but because it was unexpected. The dopamine doesn't signal pleasure. It signals, pay attention, something unpredictable has happened here. Stay alert. Keep checking. And this is the critical distinction most people miss. The system doesn't make you like scrolling. It makes you want to scroll. Neuroscientists call this incentive salience, the separation between wanting and liking. You can be 3 hours deep into a feed, feeling hollow and drained, and still unable to stop. This is because the wanting circuit is indifferent to your level of enjoyment. It only cares about the next potential reward. If this were just clever design, it would be one thing. But unsealed court filings tell a much darker story. According to internal documents cited in litigation and reported by Time magazine, Meta researchers internally described the effect of their own platform in striking terms. Internal communications allegedly compared their role to that of drug pushers, specifically because of the addictive nature of the interface they had built. These weren't outside critics. These were the people who built the system, and they had the data to back it up. Internal Meta research flagged as early as 2017 that teenagers using Instagram reported feeling addicted to the platform and expressed a sense of powerlessness to stop using it. Separate internal surveys found that 13% of users aged 13 to 15 received unwanted sexual advances on a weekly basis. In 2019, an internal audit revealed that Meta's Accounts You May Follow feature served as a breeding ground for predators, with one analysis claiming the system recommended up to 1.4 million inappropriate accounts to teenagers daily. Here's the part that makes the story escalate. According to court filings cited by multiple state attorneys general, proposed safety fixes were allegedly rejected due to the reduction it would cause in teen engagement metrics. The incentive structure within these companies reveals everything. Product managers and growth engineers were promoted based on two numbers: daily active users and time spent. Within these organizations, according to the documented evidence, safety and well-being were explicitly framed as non-goals, or worse, as threats to the metrics that determined career advancement. And the research that contradicted the growth narrative? According to evidence presented in the Facebook files disclosed by whistleblower Frances Haugen in 2021, internal studies showing high rates of teenage depression and body image damage were allegedly halted or restricted to a small circle of executives. The use of siloing and non-disclosure agreements ensured that individual designers only ever saw their specific micrometric, never the aggregate human cost. This is what psychologists call diffusion of responsibility. No single person felt accountable for the harm because the algorithm or the team made the final decision. A group of intelligent and well-intentioned individuals constructed a system that has a significant impact on millions of people, yet no single individual felt responsible for the outcome, and the consequences weren't theoretical. In New Mexico, Attorney General Raul Torres filed a separate lawsuit specifically targeting Meta over a pattern of sextortion cases linked to Instagram's recommendation system. In the wrongful death lawsuits filed by the families of two teenage boys, Levi Makajewski, 13, and Murray Downey, 16, The allegations are chilling. The platform's algorithm allegedly connected the boys to predators who coerced them into sharing explicit images and then extorted them. Both boys took their own lives. These cases frame the corporate negligence not just as an ethical failure, but as a question of criminal urgency, because the algorithmic hunting ground actively endangered these children. According to the plaintiffs, it delivered them directly to the predators. So what does this system actually do to a human brain over time? When your reward pathway is chronically overstimulated, and we're talking about hundreds of micro-dopamine hits per day from notifications, likes, and feed refreshes, your brain adapts. It downregulates its dopamine D2 receptors. This is a well-documented neuroadaptation. It means your brain physically reduces its own sensitivity to reward. The same stimulus that used to feel satisfying now feels flat. So you need more stimulation just to reach the same baseline. It is, in neurobiological terms, the same adaptation observed in substance dependency. Peer-reviewed neuroimaging studies show structural and functional changes in the reward circuits of people who exhibit problematic social media use. Researchers have documented correlations between heavy usage and changes in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and long-term planning, and the amygdala, which governs emotional processing. Heavy media multitaskers show reduced gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex, a region critical for emotional regulation. And here's a number that should unsettle you. Research consistently shows that after a single digital distraction, one notification, or glance at your phone, it takes an average of 23 minutes to return to full focus on the original task. Not 23 seconds, 23 minutes. But the damage during those 23 minutes is worse than most people realize. Researchers have identified a phenomenon called attention residue. When you switch away from a task, neural activity related to what you were doing doesn't shut off cleanly. It lingers. Your brain effectively operates two processes simultaneously: the new task and the remnants of the previous one. That residue degrades the quality of everything you do in the recovery window. It's not just lost time, it's compromised performance. In healthcare settings, this kind of interruption-driven cognitive drag has been found to increase diagnostic errors by over 12% and prescription errors by a similar margin. The 23-minute rule isn't an inconvenience. In certain environments, it's a safety hazard. And perhaps the most startling finding is this: the mere presence of a smartphone reduces cognitive capacity even when the device is turned off. This has been confirmed across multiple studies. Just to avoid checking your phone, your brain dedicates a portion of its processing power. This implies that the device continues to drain your attention even when you believe you are ignoring it. Researchers who study slot machines call this the machine zone, a state of continuous partial attention where the user is neither fully engaged nor fully disengaged. They're just in the loop. Natasha Dow-Schull documented this phenomenon extensively in casino environments, where gamblers would play for so long they'd collapse at the machine. The other gamblers wouldn't even look up. The fundamental method remains unchanged, only the platform has changed. Let's pull back from the individual brain and look at what this means at scale. The World Health Organization reported in 2024 that 11% of adolescents in Europe now meet the criteria for problematic social media use. That figure was 7% in 2018. In 4 years, the rate increased by more than 50%. And this is the number that meets a clinical threshold. The actual number of young people experiencing some degree of compulsive use is likely far higher. The U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory in 2023 specifically warning about the risks of social media to pediatric brain development. It's not a suggestion, it's an advisory. And the economic cost is staggering. Workplace distraction fueled by digital interruption costs American businesses an estimated $650 billion annually. Globally, the estimated productivity loss due to employee disengagement and distraction stands at $8.8 trillion. That's not a typo. Trillion. Meanwhile, a large-scale audit using AI-based detection found that 11.1% of top e-commerce websites deploy what are known as dark patterns, manipulative interface designs that steer users toward choices they wouldn't otherwise make, hidden opt-outs, disguised ads, pre-checked boxes. These aren't edge cases. They're an industry-wide practice. And on the regulatory front, legal scholars describe the situation as regulatory capture, where the agencies tasked with overseeing these companies have been too slow, too underfunded, or too entangled to act effectively. The EU has moved toward a Digital Fairness Act targeting manipulative interfaces. But in the United States, meaningful regulation has been described as a race against the clock, a scramble to implement protections before the cognitive erosion becomes generational. The bellwether trials, initiated in California in early 2026, could potentially mark a significant milestone. For the first time, executives are being forced to answer, under oath and on the record, whether the design choices that drove their platform's growth were made with full knowledge of their neurobiological consequences. Now, this is where intellectual honesty matters. Not everything in this story is equally certain. What is solid? The existence of variable ratio reinforcement schedules embedded in platform interfaces. The documented decline in attention span from 150 seconds to 47 seconds over 2 decades. The institutional awareness evidenced by the Facebook files, the unsealed meta memos, and the state attorney's general complaints. What remains uncertain? The exact point at which neural recovery from chronic overstimulation becomes impossible. Whether specific algorithms, like TikTok's recommendation engine, are qualitatively more addictive than others because of faster feedback loops. The long-standing debate continues over whether the structural brain changes observed in heavy users are caused directly by the platforms, or whether people predisposed to compulsive behavior are simply more likely to use them heavily. The correlation is strong, but the causation is still debated. Some scholars also argue that screen time is a poor metric entirely, and that the harm depends more on the user's psychological state and the type of content than on raw hours of usage. These are legitimate scientific debates, and they deserve honest engagement, not dismissal. But here's what's not debatable. The companies had the data. Their own internal research told them what was happening. And according to the evidence now in the public record, the response in multiple documented cases was not to fix the problem, but to protect the metric. The 47-second attention span isn't a personal failing, it's an engineered outcome, the downstream consequence of a system designed by behavioral scientists, scaled by growth engineers, and optimized for a single variable: time spent on the platform. The formula is simple. Make the reward unpredictable. Remove every cue that would let the conscious mind intervene. Promote the people who increase engagement. Bury the research that shows the cost. And repeat, at a scale of billions of users, thousands of times per day. And if you still think this is about individual willpower, consider this. In 2025, researchers conducted a field study of a browser extension called Purpose Mode that allowed users to toggle off infinite scroll and disable notifications. Over 2 weeks, the participants' perceived distraction dropped from 28% to 7%. They spent 21 fewer minutes on social media per day. They didn't even try harder. The features that were hijacking their attention were simply turned off. When you remove the mechanism, the compulsion disappears. That's not a willpower problem. That's proof that the addiction is engineered into the design itself. The question that remains isn't whether this happened. The court filings, the neuroscience, and the timeline make that clear. The question is whether knowing the mechanism changes anything. Because the one advantage you have over the pigeon in Skinner's box, the only advantage, is that someone can explain to you how the lever works. What you do with that information is the only part of this system that the algorithm can't predict. If you found this episode fascinating, maybe even a little chilling, I think you'll enjoy this next one as well.